Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation on our paper titled "Warn Them or Just Block Them: Comparing the Privacy Concerns of Older and Working Age Adults." This study was motivated by certain gaps in literature. We found that prior work has yet to extensively explore the usable privacy perceptions of older adults. Kang et al. Reported that older adults are known to be less informed of privacy violations that they may perform, as well as protective measures that they can take. There has also been generally less focus on the direct comparisons between older adults and their younger counterparts. Keeping this in mind, our research aims to address the following questions. What are the mental models and the perceptions of privacy among older adults? What are the mental models and perceptions of privacy among working age adults? And what are the overlaps and differences in the mental models and privacy perceptions between both these age groups? Now, we consider mental models to be the explanation of someone's thought process about what something is or how something works. Now, Oates et al. Conducted a great study to understand the mental models and privacy perceptions of individuals using quite a novel qualitative approach. They incorporated picture drawing sessions and they asked participants to draw what privacy means to them. It's really quite an interesting paper. We replicated elements of their study into our study with older adults. Well, to be more specific, we split our study into two parts. For study one, we conducted some semi-structured interviews with 20 older adults. We provided participants with a sheet of paper and we asked them, what does privacy mean to you in both digital and non-digital contexts? They were then asked to explain their drawings and also ask questions about their perceptions of privacy. A set of 10 images drawn by the older adults were then shown to the working age adults. They were asked whether they related to any of the privacy perceptions which were being depicted in those illustrations by older adults. And the working age adults were then asked a few questions about their privacy perceptions, followed by optionally drawing their own depictions of privacy. The illustrations and the interview responses from both the age groups were qualitatively analyzed, and 10 hypotheses were formed. These hypotheses served as a foundation for study two. Now, study two involved an online survey using LIKERT questions and pairwise image comparisons to determine whether the qualitative findings that we got from study one could extend to a larger sample of 111 participants. Now, for the remainder of this presentation, I will go over the details of study one and study two, covering some examples of interesting data which we collected. I will then briefly discuss some of the recurring themes which emerged, as well as some risk scenarios that we developed. I will then conclude with some final takeaways and the implications of our findings. Now, the term risk scenarios, we use this term as a narrative example of sorts, which symbolizes our key findings. I'll show an example of this later on. Now, our study allowed us to gain a deeper understanding of older adults' privacy and security concerns, while also identifying the overlaps and the differences with a younger demographic. We did this by using surveys to compare the pairs of illustrations from the two age groups. We considered this to be a novel approach to contrasting usable privacy concerns between user groups. And we also offered risk scenarios in order to aid the tailoring of applications, which would ultimately help better accommodate the privacy concerns of this demographic. I will now go over the two studies, starting with study 1, which involved semi-structured interviews. We recruited 20 older adults from local state-operated senior centers and 20 working-age adults from public community venues like libraries and universities. These venues were known to have diverse socioeconomic and educational backgrounds, and we use recruitment flyers and mailing lists. The interviews began with the collection of demographic information. Participants were then handed a pencil and sheets of paper, and they were asked to draw what privacy meant to them. We asked them follow-up questions after they were done drawing to explain their drawings to us. And the researchers added annotations on the drawings using a pen of a different color to help explain the drawing. After that, questions were then asked to the participants about their online experiences, their confidence in maintaining their privacy, any past experiences they had with privacy violations, and how they think other age groups maintain their privacy. For the interviews with working age adults, they were first shown a set of 10 images drawn by older adults, and then they were asked whether they related to each of these images. They were then asked a series of follow-up questions, and then to draw their own depictions of privacy. Now, these are some of the illustrations drawn by our participants, which I thought were quite interesting. On the left, we see an older adult feeling overwhelmed by privacy threats, and they're saying, woe is me in the digital privacy sense. And you can see that they feel quite negatively by the expression that they've drawn. While on the right, we see a working age adult feeling resigned by privacy threats and saying, I give up. So this shows a contrast in how each of these age groups reacted to being faced with privacy threats. And these are some of the quotes from some of the participants. P3, who was an older adult, said, Lord knows what they have, talking about personal data held by third parties, and who knows how they got it. So this showed a lack of understanding of data storage online, but also a fear of the vulnerability of their information. P36, who was a working age adult, said that, but they, which are the corporations, are not evil. My emotion would be more frustration than depression or anger. I feel resigned and I just pretty much accept it at this point. So this sort of reinforces the illustration we saw in the previous slide, a sense of resignation among working age adults. Now, when asked what ideal privacy would be to them, one working age adult drew an interesting image of a castle, but they also said that this is ideal-ish privacy. Even though it's a castle, it can be breached by a battering ram or a Trojan horse if given the time. If the guards are not paying attention, the ram and the horse can just break in, and then the castle just falls. So it just shows a general skepticism towards the concept of ideal privacy itself. And it could also imply that just the abundance of privacy threats has already begun to desensitize some working age adults. For the analysis of this data that we saw, two researchers performed inductive thematic coding of the illustrations and the interview responses. Findings from these interviews were framed as 10 hypotheses, and these hypotheses served as a foundation for the LIKERT questions that were used in an online survey and distributed to a larger population of 111 participants. Pairwise image comparisons were also included, which consisted of images drawn by each age group, and they were selected due to certain contrasting themes that were found. So an example of which we saw a few slides ago with each age group's reaction to privacy threats, feeling overwhelmed versus feeling resigned. The quantitative analysis of the survey responses then provided a final set of significant results. Now, as I mentioned, we found 10 hypotheses from study 1. These are just a subset of the 10 hypotheses we ended up with. We found that older adults are more worried about society's privacy than individual privacy. They are more concerned about leaking information through mobile phones than any other devices. They are more frustrated by global online attacks as opposed to local scam calls. They feel more targeted and victimized by privacy attacks. And they prefer having power, control, and ownership over objects as a form of ideal privacy. I will now describe study 2, which involved using online surveys to extend our qualitative findings. As touched on before, LIKERT questions were developed based on the hypotheses we found from study 1. And these are some of the examples of the LIKERT questions that were used in the survey. So questions such as, I give permissions to most of my apps on my phone to access my private information. How well does this sentence describe me? And then participants were asked to choose from a 5-point LIKERT scale. This is an example of the pairwise image comparisons incorporated in our survey. The images were described to the participant as well. As we see here on the top, it says, given below are 2 images. On the left, we see a person who feels targeted and victimized by privacy threats. On the right, we see a person who has come to terms with it. And then participants were asked to select either A or B or neither if they didn't relate to either image. For analyzing our survey responses, we used Mann-Whitney U-test for the LIKERT data, Fisher's exact test for the pairwise image comparisons, and Holm-Bonferroni corrections were used to account for the large number of hypotheses that we had. After the analysis, we found that older adults are more apprehensive than working age adults about giving their private information to strangers, even if they had safeguards in place to protect them. They felt more frustrated than working age adults by global online attacks as opposed to local scam callers. And they were less concerned than working age adults about their private information being shared online through social media. Our findings showed that older adults exhibited complex privacy attitudes. They would use certain mitigation strategies, which would include visiting the physical equivalents of online services, like going to the bank or going to a shopping mall, instead of using an mobile banking or online shopping application. They thought that visiting the physical location would be safer than using the digital alternative. Their acceptance or aversion of using technology often stemmed from their own personal experiences in the past or through stories that were told to them from relatives or family or friends. A theme of empowerment was also identified from our studies, where older adults were helping themselves to better understand issues relating to security and privacy. There was a presence of misconceptions and feelings of uncertainty during our interviews, which highlighted that education could still go further to better support older adults. While both age groups in the study touched upon the subject of social media, the working adult age group highlighted concerns regarding how private data can be leaked and sometimes out of their control. For example, they felt that information may be inadvertently shared with friends of friends on social media or via personal devices. And finally, a theme of being resigned to threats being faced was also detected among working age adults. Now, we offer risk scenarios to better convey the practical implications of our findings. These are meant to be condensed narrative exemplars of the core findings that you saw regarding the primary privacy concerns of older adults as compared to working age adults. Now, let's consider the following scenario for a fictional character. Say, give them the name Mary. Mary visited the bank to deposit a check in her name. She was required to wait in line for approximately an hour for her turn, while others got in ahead of her. However, despite the long waiting time at the bank and overall poor experience, she still intends to deposit her check at the bank the next time instead of using a mobile banking application. Now, after this happens, Mary says something along these lines. I know that using an app on my phone is probably faster, or maybe even a machine, but I don't know what's happening with my check when I use these devices. At the bank, I can see a person who's physically present. I can even talk to them and ask them questions. I just feel safer and at ease this way. So this illustrates Mary's concern with online banking and discomfort with not knowing what's happening behind the scenes. We find that fear of the unknown is a powerful detrimental factor, which leads Mary to be more comfortable with tangible transactions rather than intangible ones. These risk scenarios could help designers develop empathy and understand the circumstances older adults face while using technology, which may be different from their own. So to briefly sum up, we use draw metrics to assess older and working age adults' mental models. We used an online survey to extend our findings. We found that older adults are more apprehensive than working age adults about giving their private information to strangers. They feel more frustrated by global online attacks as opposed to local scam callers. And they're less concerned about their private information being shared online through social media. In the future, studies should consider performing more direct comparisons rather than focusing older adults in isolation, as it should provide more direct and focused paths to impact this important user group. And we have seen the benefits of performing comparisons through our study. Designers could also potentially analyze the risk scenarios as motivators towards understanding older adults' needs and their pain points while designing tools for privacy. Thank you.